Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're going to wait just a couple of minutes and let some other folks trickle in, and then we'll begin today's discussion. Okay, I see some folks continuing to trickle in, but I'm happy to begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of our Homeroom webinar series in partnership with Learn4Life, Collective Impact, Reengaging Students Through Cross-Sector Collaboration. My name is Jessica Au. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst at the Hunt Institute. And for those who are unfamiliar with the Hunt Institute, we're founded by four-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt, and we serve as a resource for policymakers on education issues across the education continuum, both with in-person and virtual convenings, with research and forms of technical assistance. And so before we get the conversation started, I did want to provide a brief logistical overview. So we're going to start the conversation with about a 30-minute moderated discussion with our panelists, and then we'll pivot to a Q&A with our audience. And so if any questions come to mind throughout the discussion, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature that's located on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then we'll do our best to address them during the webinar, and then putting them together for our Q&A portion. And so we are also recording the conversation, and in the next couple of days, we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel. So if you need to hop off at any point, feel free to go to our YouTube if you want to finish listening to the conversation. We also encourage you to join us on Twitter, where you can participate in the conversation using the hashtag #EdHomeroom. And we'll also be live tweeting from our Twitter account at Hunt K12Ed and at the Hunt Institute. So we have a great conversation ahead of us, so happy to get started. Now that we're over 2.5 years into the pandemic, states and districts are continuing to really put together the pieces for a fuller picture of the impact that school closures have had on students, including academic and social emotional learning loss, growing learning gaps, student trauma and mental health issues, and missing and disengaged students, among many other impacts. And so more than ever, there's been a growing need to really leverage cross-sector collaboration and bring together communities and resources really beyond school walls to tackle these issues head on. And so collective impact really does exactly that. It brings together community members, nonprofit organizations, government, and the private sector, and more to really achieve that population and systems level change. And so through these cross-sector initiatives, collective impact helps communities really define their problems, create a vision to solve it, and develop systems to measure progress and impact, and really build those sustainable models and programs so that student outcomes can continue to improve over the long term. And so today we're going to hear from experts in the field who really live and breathe collective impact and who work in their communities to move the needle on student outcomes. And so we'll be learning about the unique role that collective impact can play during this critical juncture in education, and how cross-sector partnerships can really help align key stakeholders and drive actionable decision-making. And so with us for this conversation, we have Dr. Ken Zeff, who's the founding executive director of Learn4Life, based out of Metro Atlanta. Previously, Ken has served as both superintendent and chief strategy and innovation officer for Fulton County Schools and the chief operations officer for Green Dot Public Schools. Ken was also a White House fellow and served as a senior policy consultant to the U.S. Secretary of Education. And at Learn4Life, Dr. Zeff leads work to impact student outcomes by engaging with diverse stakeholders, aligning efforts and resources, and collecting actionable data. So thank you for being here, Ken, and for your partnership on this webinar. Next, we have Ashley Phillipson, who's the Deputy Director of Impact Tulsa, a collective impact organization dedicated to turning data into systemic change. and working to ensure that every child in Tulsa has every opportunity to succeed from cradle to career. Ashley is a systems, culture, development, civic engagement, and school curriculum design coach with over a decade of experience. At Impact Tulsa, Ashley uses her experiences to partner with students, families, districts, and partner organizations to drive policy and systems change and build programs that create sustainable outcomes for students. So welcome, Ashley. And then last but not least, we have Superintendent Tricia McManus of Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. Superintendent McManus has a proven track record for turning around underperforming schools, as well as engaging with community partners on initiatives such as her district's Our Safe Return Plan, which worked to vaccinate district employees post-COVID. Superintendent McManus is also uniquely situated to discuss collective impact work from both the district perspective and the organizational perspective, as she currently serves on the executive advisory board of the Forsyth Promise, a collective impact organization that works within the district. So thank you for sharing your time with us today, Superintendent. So really appreciate all of our panelists. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and I'm happy to jump right into our questions. And again, to our audience members, please feel free to post your questions in the chat throughout, in the Q&A, sorry, throughout the discussion. So Ashley, let's begin with you and your question. I want to talk more about the work you help lead as part of Impact Tulsa. Can you walk us through Impact Tulsa's approach to collective impact and how that approach informs your organization's programming, including your initiatives like your youth action teams and the My Brother's Keeper Alliance?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much. So as Jessica mentioned, we are this collective impact organization in Tulsa County, and we work with 21 school districts in our area and 9 post-secondary institutions. We've been around since 2014, and our team is comprised of the data and research arm. We have a school district support team, a training and evaluation team, as well as our My Brother's Keeper team. And our approach to collective impact is to leverage that data expertise and our ability as a convener and a critical, to connect critical partners to not only share our community stories, but center community in sharing those stories and center community in shaping systems change. We do that through building their capacity. We have ongoing learning experiences. We have long-term collaborative action networks, and we work to target problems at the root. So really shying away from programs and incremental change and really looking at what are the biggest key levers. And lastly, before sharing about our youth action teams and our professional development and youth action My Brother's Keeper, excuse me. We do collect and manage data that helps organizations who don't have access to data systems. We give them a macro view of the county and can go down to the student level. We have a child equity index that you can look at our site that was just linked in the chat. And then we also serve as a backbone to organizations to expand their capacity. And I'll go into the programs that I support under collaborative action. We have youth action teams across 3 districts here, and we are excited because they have been given a grant to design and test post-secondary tests of change at their district. We see not enough students getting post-secondary opportunities, whether it's credentialing or degrees. So instead of adults sitting around a table and problem solving, young people have been going through a design process. And instead of just having a thought that may not have the backing of funds, every school team gets about $10,000 to pilot a district level intervention and the potential to scale that. We offer them support, and then also to make sure that it's sustainable, have trained coaches at the school who receive a stipend, and the youth also receive stipends. And then our My Brother's Keeper team also has a youth component where young people are partnering with grassroots organizations and institutions to disrupt early childhood and post-secondary barriers to success. And I can expand more on that later.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. Appreciate that. And also appreciate you y'all working on focusing on data. I feel like at the Hunt Institute, we work across the education continuum, and no matter what issue you're talking about, we found that the issue and the solution often lies in data, whether that's a lack of data or the need to collect more data. So definitely appreciate that. Moving on to a question for you, Ken. As you lead Learn4Life, your organization works to collect information around key indicators, things like kindergarten readiness, third grade reading proficiency, and post-secondary success, just to name a few. Can you highlight for us why Learn4Life has centered those metrics in its decision-making and how it's been using this information it collects to support and re-engage students across Metro Atlanta?
Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate the question. Appreciate the opportunity to be with this esteemed panelists. As a matter of fact, Ashley and I were just in Chicago last week for the annual conference where there's 70 networks like Foresight, like San Francisco and Seattle and Chicago, all over the country engaging in this work. Well, it looks a little different in every community. It's an exciting time and it's necessary time to come together, because we're not going to get out of the hole that we're in, not just honestly even before the pandemic, unless we leverage all the resources in our community. And the reason we focus on that data, and I think you mentioned it too, Jessica, is we have to know what true north is. We have to have a clear idea of where we're all headed, because everyone around our table, whether they be nonprofit partners, funders, business interests, school districts, they come at the world from a different perspective, but we can all agree on what the outcomes we seek are. And as you mentioned, the research says that if a kid has early literacy skills, they're more likely to be able to walk the stage when at the end of their high school experience. If they have that 8th grade math skills, they have that higher order thinking that they're going to need to be successful in more sophisticated classes. And it's not just entering into, high school graduation is not enough anymore. We need kids to, the jobs of the future are going to require some sort of post-secondary education, but we can't just measure enrollment. We have to measure completion, because just getting a kid into a program is not sufficient unless they're prepared to finish that investment. So that's how we've organized ourselves. And those are the sort of objective, there's nobody on the other side of that conversation. If we can get everybody to agree that these are where we should focus, that will contribute to the long-term prosperity of our community. The piece around data is so important because it allows us to find bright spots. We take an asset-based approach. There's lots of things that we're struggling with in public education, but there's lots of stuff that's working too. We don't spend enough time sorting that out and lifting up and learning from those strategies. And so if we can identify successfully what the metrics we're looking at, and then we can see, okay, who's killing it? What schools are doing a good job and are above the regression line of where we might expect them to be? Then we can deploy teams to see, okay, well, what is their secret sauce? What can we learn from them? What can we scale across Metro Atlanta? Because Metro Atlanta we're 600,000 kids, 8 school districts. There are pockets of excellence throughout, but as Ashley said, it's got to be systemic. It can't just be stuck in one corner of the region. And so we're that thin layer that comes together, looks at data, identifies what's working, and then looks to take that to scale. And just the last thing I'll say about data is it's so important that we use data as a flashlight, not a hammer. We don't use it to penalize or punish, because that's gonna just recreate these divisions that we see too often. If we can say, look, we're trying to find out what's working. Data tells us where to look. Doesn't tell us everything, but it tells us where to look. Then that brings people into the conversation. And in order to really bring everyone together, this has to be an asset-based conversation. It cannot be a deficit conversation, because people are gonna shut down, and our kids need us to step up in this moment and really find out what's working, so we can all get back on track.
I really appreciate that, and totally agree on that asset-based approach. We recently conducted a nationwide survey and haven't released the results yet, but one of our key findings is that the public really wants to be forward-looking and solutions-oriented. They're kind of tired of talking about COVID and the pandemic. We've been living in it for so long that they're ready to really move forward and talk about what we can do moving forward. So definitely appreciate that. I'd like to move on to a question for you, Superintendent. Tricia, Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools serves over 50,000 students, many of whom really require different needs and supports. As many of us know, gaps have continued to persist or even widen for students along racial and economic lines since the pandemic's onset, leading to a lot of differences for children of color and their peers on metrics like kindergarten readiness, mental health, high school graduation rates, as we discussed. So Superintendent, as board member for Forsyth Promise, how have you incorporated cross-sector voices into your decision-making, and where have you seen those efforts make the most significant impact?
Yeah, so I am very fortunate to lead in a community where people across all sectors really want to be involved. They are really, really committed to the education of our students. I've been here 2 years, but that has been one of the most impressive parts of being in Winston-Salem is really how much involvement the community does want to have, and everybody is working toward the success of our students. And the pandemic obviously has increased some of the gaps. And so we're really focused on closing opportunity gaps so that we can close our achievement gaps that exist between our between races of students. And so I will say that we have so many different groups that are actually groups that have been formed that come together. Forsyth Promise is one of those, and it was formed years ago. Most of these groups were formed pre-pandemic, but they have continued on, and it was really to bring different voices to the table from different sectors of our community, all for making sure the experiences our students have from cradle to career are creating success, allowing our students to see success in their futures, current and in their futures. And so Forsyth Promise is one of those things. I will tell you there's another group called the Ed Initiative. It brings together the health organizations, our hospitals. We have a lot of health organizations in our community. It brings government. The mayor is on this group. It brings together business leaders. It brings together philanthropic organizations, social service organizations, actually faith-based organizations, and all of these voices are at the table in this one group called the Ed Initiative, which really functions similar to a Forsyth Promise. And honestly, the goal of this group is to help us achieve our 90 by 25 literacy goal. And so the folks that come to the table, whatever their part of the work is, they are problem solving. How can they remove barriers for the school district? And so that our students can be on level in reading or proficient in reading by 3rd grade. And so whether it be food, whether it be transportation, whether it be any kind of resources, health, this group comes together regularly to actually tackle what are the issues that could prevent a child from reading on grade level, because we know they're capable of doing this. And so that is another group. And so there's another group called Pre-K Priority. The entire focus of this group, cross-sector, has been to come together and get us on the same page in all, private providers, public, Head Start, all of us being on the same page with what we're doing in pre-K. As a result of that, we have a common curriculum across all pre-K providers, and that is both in our school system, private providers, again, Head Start. So that is another success. We have a school justice partnership that is exactly for the same purpose, where you're bringing the different entities to the table to try to help our students stay away from moving into the court system. And so all of these groups are coming together regularly to actually problem solve and help the school system, because at the end of the day, we cannot do it alone. It is a community. You said that, Jessica, as you set this up today. It is definitely about collective impact, because school districts can't do this work alone. We have our students 6 to 7 to 8 hours a day, but the entire community can get to that 24-hour a day working together. And so again, we don't have all the answers either. And so all of these groups working together, and a little bit later in one of the questions, I hope to talk about how you make this possible, because my role as superintendent is really important in making, and that's why I sit on the board of the Forsyth Promise, because my role and my voice at the table, along with my team, is really important. Because again, we're talking about our school system data. We're talking about our achievement data as we meet with all of these different organizations. And so, yeah, so we actually make many of our decisions through in a collective way by bringing many community voices to the table, many community players to the table.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. Really appreciate hearing about your work on the ground, and Ken and Ashley as well. And really hearing about your stakeholder engagement is a great segue into my next question, actually. Collective impact and cross-sector collaboration, of course, requires a variety of stakeholders to come together and really navigate those systems that haven't typically been designed to accommodate them. So with that in mind, I imagine there are a lot of challenges in bringing together cross-sector voices and identifying the most effective path forward for improving student outcomes. And so what kinds of challenges have you faced within your communities that other community and state leaders engaging in this work should be aware of? And how has your organization or district really responded to and addressed those challenges? I'm happy to start with you, Superintendent.
Okay. So there are challenges, and one of those is around representation. You know, when you bring folks to the table, we need to make sure that we have representation of all. We're making decisions about our students. We're making decisions that are going to impact all students, and also those that have been underserved, those in some of our most marginalized community. Are there voices at the table, or is it always the same group when you think about, you know, collective impact? I mean, the people that we are supporting need to be at the table. And so that's really important. That can actually be just making sure that you know all the voices. I mean, we work very closely with our Hispanic community as well. Our Hispanic population is our fastest growing population of students and community. And so we work with the Latino Congress regularly. We bring them to the table, but that if again, we cannot make decisions without representation from all at the table. So I think that's really important. It's easy sometimes for people to come together, business leaders, health organizations. You've got to make sure you've got all voices, including your parents and other community members that do not belong potentially to those groups. And so, and I'll talk about how we do that in a minute. I think data, we talked about data, that can be a challenge. And so we've got one of our the outcomes of Foresight Promise is a data share agreement. And that has been really powerful for community group, for all of our groups to have like firsthand access to data, whether that be our achievement data, discipline data. And so we have an MOU at that the data is shared regularly. I think that's important because as you create plans to be implemented, you've got to track what's working and not. And I think that can become a barrier or a challenge. People just coming to the table with great intentions and nothing getting done. That is not, no one has time for that. So you've got to be able to come to the table, really be transparent on the data, get the ideas down, and actually have owners of what's going to happen next. And that is why the school district, since so much of this is what are the outcomes of our students, and it's all focused on how we provide a high quality education for our students, you've got to have the district at the table and being part of the conversation. And so that is why I'm on that board. I'm on a lot of different boards. We have a group that's called Project Impact that has been, honestly, they helped us expand our pre-K programming. They are focused also on 90 by 25. I have a seat on that board as well. So it's like, it's all of these groups coming together that are invested. I think duplication of efforts can be a challenge, a very large challenge and it can feel overwhelming. And that is when I first got here, so many groups were reaching out to me like, oh, we've got this group, we've got this group, we've got this group. Can you be on the board? And I think sometimes duplication of efforts can really become challenging. And so I think that being very intentional about who's doing what. So if it's Foresight Promise, it's going to focus on pre-K to career to career, what or cradle to career, what is going to be the focus of that group? Because I don't want to tell Ed Initiative, we also don't need you, who is focusing on 90 by 25. I don't want to do school justice partnership. We need you too, because we're focusing there on restorative practices and on really honestly keeping students out of the juvenile justice system and how we're working together. And so all of that can be overwhelming. And so you've got to have a clear strategy on this work, and it cannot just be random. And so that leads me to also being very intentional of who owns, who convenes the group, so who's the convener, who owns that, who's the owner of the action plans and the follow through, and be very clear around all of that. And also then sustainability. As you come together and you're creating all this, how are you going to scale and sustain this work? So those are all things that as we've been meeting as we meet with our groups, that we outline very clearly, so that we can avoid those challenges.
Thank you so much, Superintendent McManus. So what I'm hearing is really on elevating underrepresented voices, improving data, being really intentional about different stakeholders, having a clear strategy, and figuring out where these partnerships will live. I think those definitely resonate with me personally, with the work that we do and with the work that I'm hearing from all of you.
Thanks, Jessica. And I love the way you condensed that so perfectly. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Would love to turn that question to Ken.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long list of challenges because the world isn't built for collaboration, unfortunately. It's the structures in place, both from funding and accountability, are very siloed. And so it takes, you have to go into this with intentional effort. I think Tricia outlined a bunch of the challenges. I'll just yes and no's. You know, there's a couple. We have 8 districts that we work with in Metro Atlanta. Superintendent transition is not something new, and it is something that is not exceptional. It happens, you know, since I've been doing this for 5 years. Every district has turned over. Some have turned over several times, and so it's important to have deep relationships within the school system, because if you are just tied, like Tricia said, she's out there like trying to be the connective tissue and hold it together. You can't let that just fall to the superintendent. You have to have deep roots in different parts of the organization, in different parts of the school systems, both the curriculum directors and assistant superintendents, or whatever the work is. I think that's a good watch out for us. We're in Georgia right now, and we seem to constantly have elections here about every 6 months or so. And so keeping the politics out of the work is really important to keeping our tent complete. There's lots of work that needs to happen that we can all agree. Nobody's on the other side of 3rd grade literacy. Nobody doesn't think that workforce isn't improved when we have more kids in post-secondary. So we focus on those issues that bring us together and stay away from some of the issues that will divide us, because, you know, there's other, and I have a point of view about these, many people in our teams do. But there's other venues for that work. For this work to stay focused on the challenges that kids are facing, we try to keep the politics out of the work. And then the last thing I'll say is, and again, many challenges, but really understanding the problem, doing factor analyses. And I think Ashley mentioned this before, is you go in several levels deep. If you have a literacy issue, it's not because kids don't necessarily have enough books. It's, you know, we have to look at, well, where school is performing. What is the teacher professional development? What is the ecosystem around literacy? What engagement are they getting from the nonprofit community? Getting really developing a deep understanding of the issue that allows us to challenge some of the root problems and not just stay on the surface. And so sometimes that can be hard because you can lose momentum and folks are eager to get to the work, but balancing that study and analysis with action is a constant tension for us, because you want to show results, you want to show momentum, but you also don't want to be on the surface. And so I think, you know, we don't have easy answers to that, but we're constantly asking that question. And I think by bringing the group into that conversation and being very vulnerable about that, I think we keep the tent together and keeps that momentum going so we can keep pushing this work forward.
Great, thank you so much, Ken. To your point about, you know, it not just falling to one person or the superintendent, I think one thing we've been hearing from states that we've worked with is that there's need to develop an initiative or partnerships that really outlive administrations. So we always have those work groups and initiatives that come out, but how do we make sure they're long lasting and continue to last even with possible turnover? So definitely agree with that. Would love to move this question to Ashley.
Yes, Jessica, that point on sustainability really resonates. So some challenges that we've designed different approaches or solutions to is constantly understanding the common interests. So I'm in Oklahoma. We have you all can Google our state. So to keep issues that have been politicized from, eclipsing actually working together, understanding common interests across factions is very important. So making sure that our team, is embedded across different communities in our region is very important to be able to identify that value proposition, no matter what side of the aisle people are on, because we are aiming towards that long-term systems change and policy change. Also meeting people where they are, with our increased focus on youth and families and those most impacted by inequity being present. Where are your meetings being held? What time are they being held? Are we offering stipends for folks for their time? For, if this is not their day job to do this type of work, is food available? Childcare options are available. So building in our budget resources so that people's time is valued tangibly. And also transportation. Transportation is a huge barrier. We don't have a strong public infrastructure on transit. So making sure that people can actually get to us. Also, communication. We have a great community where surveys and people have responded. We've had community meetings, really making sure, what are we asking that hasn't been asked before, so that people are not jaded. People have been surveyed excessively. So really making sure that we are thoughtful whenever we are doing a discovery conversation or a survey. There's a saying that urgency is the enemy of equity. So you can often feel like, oh, we've got to rush, we've got to hurry up, and we don't have time to go talk to young people. Had we not taken the time to talk to about 110 boys and young men of color, our MBK strategy would have been really off to not hear from them. So baking in the time to get the voices and perspectives that you care about, and being okay with that when a sense of urgency sometimes can impede being truly equitable. And also a criteria for engaging. We are, an organization of capable people. I love the folks that I work with, and we get tapped for a lot. So we had to create a criteria for partnership to make sure that there are resources available, that there's a clear handoff for sustainability, because the thing we don't want to do is stand up something that falls if we were to step away. And then also to build on a point of, who said that? Ken mentioned not just having the superintendents at the table, but who are the middle managers at the city government, at the at school districts, and folks who won't necessarily leave as an administration exits, and how are we building relationships across power to ensure continuity are the things that I would add that to contribute to Tricia and Ken's points.
Thank you, Ashley. Really love your point about accessibility and building in resources into budgets. I think that really goes back to Superintendent McManus's point about underrepresented voices. Are there barriers that's currently inhibiting representation? Like, are we looking into that? And also your criteria for partnerships. I'm a big fan of MOUs in general, and so that very much sounds like that. So great. So that was the end of my follow-up question. I do want to save some time for our Q&A with our remaining time. And we already have some questions in the chat that have come in. So for our first question, let's see, what are some strategies organizations can utilize to shift funders from thinking about the programs and initiatives that they're comfortable with and towards systems change and collective impact? So I would love to go to Ashley first for this question.
Sure. So I love asking questions when people come wanting to stand something up. And I, start with what's the problem you're trying to solve, and our team can pull the data and the research that we have to then ask, well, how does this approach target this inequity? What will it take to move the needle here? What are you looking for? And once we kind of call out what the actual question is, we can use our expertise and our network to say, have you tried this? This doesn't necessarily require, building out a team. This is more like aligning resources. So I would say approaching it from a co-development standpoint is what we've been doing to really help them see resources would actually be better utilized here. The other thing we do, because we do have access to what I consider grassroots organizations, getting a lot of work done on a lean budget, instead of standing up something new, have we thought about understanding what this organization is doing over here, providing them with more resources and potentially scaling out their work. for often overlooked organizations doing what funders are asking. So those are two approaches, and being firm in we are working for long-term change and being okay with that. I have not had any funders upset at that. They actually are into the work that we are doing, thankfully.
That's great to hear.
Jessica, if I could add the exact, I think that's right. And I think I respect Ashley's taking a firm hand and really being clear, like, this is who we are. What I would say for folks that are just getting started in this work, because I know this is something that we thought about, is we have funders around on our leadership council, and funders attend our network meeting, and they come on this journey with us. And so it's we don't give them a fully baked product. And fortunately, we have a bunch of family foundations that are eager to go on this journey because they feel like they've spent a lot of money on stuff, and they have these layers of archaeological programs, and they're not exactly sure why we're still only educating 35% of our kids. And so by coming on that journey with us, asking questions and us being vulnerable, I think that they can push and they can get engaged. And so when we do ask them to make investments, they know exactly what we're talking about. And it's not something that we're cooking up behind the scenes. So like in everything else, transparency is a virtue.
Yeah, from the district perspective as well, I think it's, you know, having a clear vision as well as we come to the table. I think that obviously you're open to different, you're to the feedback. That's what collective impact is about. How do we come together and problem solve? Because again, the district doesn't have all the answers. No one entity has all the answers. But I do think that when you are clear about your priorities, transparent with your data, that you can get on the same page, even if it means an organization shifting how they would have normally funded. And I've got an example of that with that Ed Initiative group. When they first came together, they had heard about a literacy initiative and wanted the district to go in that direction. And so they funded going out and seeing that, and they wanted us to invest in that. But they actually shifted courses, the course of what they want the district to do after we came forward with other ideas. And honestly, it wasn't just other ideas, but like research evidence-based ideas with a clear plan for that. And so honestly, part of it is also just building trust with our organizations. And so it is a give and take, but I've seen that our groups that we brought to the table have been very open to either to changing, like, yes, we've been funding this for a long time, but how do we do this? Even our United Way, as for example, is funding our 90 by 25 literacy initiative. So it's really about being very clear and picking the few things that are really going to make a difference for our kids, instead of like spreading things so thin and having so many people doing so many different things. It really is about trying to bring people together toward a few common things that could actually really have an impact.
Thank you all so much. It really feels like, for collective impact, front loading that planning and, creating the vision, like that's all very important, and almost in many ways more important than the implementation later. How do we make sure we correct all of these things and get the buy-in early on? So definitely appreciate your take on that. Would love to move to question 2 that we got. As collective impact organizations grow and more partners get a seat at the table, what guidance can you provide for governance issues and other growing pains that might emerge, especially as strategies are implemented? Would love to go to Ken for this question first.
Yeah, it's a great question. And if more people are joining your table, you're doing something right. So first of all, congratulations, because when these things get really small, then we're kind of right back where we started. And so if whatever you're doing to get people at the table, keep doing that, because people are seeing themselves in the work. And there's a lot going on, and people vote with their feet. If they don't think that it's useful, then they won't show up. So that's good. It is a challenge though, because there's more voices, people are going to be very suspicious if they don't see their voice reflected in the work. So a couple things that we think about, again, we don't have the answers. We try to be transparent, as we said before. Additionally, being very clear about the role of the backbone. So we haven't talked too much about this, but Learn4Life, and I think Ashley's organization too in Tulsa, we're the convener. We're not a funder. We're not here to pick winners and losers. We're here to take the group through a process and identify where we should be, let the group's voice express itself. And so being clear that at the outset that, don't appeal to us, appeal to each other. Don't hammer us and say, hey, you guys should go in this direction. It's about letting the data drive the conversation and letting people's voices be heard. And I think if you're clear about that at the front, then you won't feel like you have to make a decision. Your job is to facilitate a conversation. The other thing I'll say is also, and I think this is important what Tricia said, and I want to lift it up because I think it's relevant here, is don't try to be everything to everybody. If you're trying to do everything, these issues are too complex and there's too many interlocking gears, especially in the beginning. It's so important in the beginning, I think, to put points on the board, show small wins. And so we did work, we're doing work around FAFSA completion. There are 1,100 less kids in Metro Atlanta that completed their FAFSA last year, in part because of the pandemic. So we have some very targeted strategies at a dozen high schools to support kids at nights and weekends and through business volunteers to get kids to complete their FAFSA, which is critical to college enrollment, college funding. So we had 437 more FAFSAs completed last year through this program. That's a very narrow, we don't go to sleep at night thinking, well, we solved education, right? This is one thread of the work. But as you tell those stories to both funders and to other folks, and you multiply them, folks start to see, okay, I see what you're doing here. I see how this thing can work. And that allows these governance issues to turn down the volume a little bit and allows people to feel like, hey, if I come here, I can be a part of something that can make a difference.
Thanks so much, Ken. And really love your point about, showing those small wins. They might feel narrow, but they're very tangible. And I at least find that funders really want to know about those metrics and how organizations are meeting them. And so definitely great feedback loops there.
We have 60 seconds for me to just tack on a couple of other strategies.
More than 60 seconds.
Okay. In our collaborative action groups, which is our cross-sector groups, in addition to the role clarity of the backbone, I would also just submit shared leadership. So we have a co-chair and a chair that is not from our staff. It is led by someone from a grassroots organization, someone from a grass tops organization for clear communication and then some ownership there. We do pay our chairs and co-chairs for this added responsibility, but that also helps distribute some of the governance. We also spend intentional time at the beginning of this working relationship, really building community. They set collaborative working alignments is what we're calling them, so that it's not something that comes top down from Impact Tulsa, but this is how we're going to work together. This is how we're going to address when things are unclear, and this is how we're going to give feedback. And we understand that we're not going to always agree. So naming those things, creating a system and accountability for addressing those things is how we're trying to set a strong path forward with regard to governance. Also, consider the tables that you're convening for. So for MBK, they have an ambassador table, which is filled with people like Superintendent McManus, our institutional leaders who don't have a lot of time to meet each month, but they want to be kept abreast. So they meet twice or three times a year. Their staff are on our working groups. So consider what is the level of engagement necessary as well, lest the table be too big and folks are not utilized.
I think those are all great points. Thank you so much, Ashley. Would love to move to another question from our audience. We're hearing a lot about the importance of incorporating student and family voice. How are you all working to include these groups in your decision-making processes? Would love to start with Superintendent McManus.
Sure. So one way we're doing that is actually through using some of our grassroots community groups. For example, we've got several Hispanic organizations that are in our Hispanic communities that the community members trust. And I mean, we work with the Hispanic League, the Latino Congress, with faith-based leaders who are in our communities. And so we work a lot through them. Instead of the traditional, let's just send out a survey, which honestly, that does not meet the masses. There is a place for surveys though. I mean, that does get some. But the other one is this direct outreach using the resources of these grassroots groups, because they're in the community all the time. And again, they've built relationships, and that's not just the Latino community, but we've used, we have an advocacy group that's a local group called Action for Equity, and others that, you know, they spend time and they'll canvas. I mean, it is very kind of, you know, old school, but yes, we canvas. And so just, if you really want to hear from all, you've got to use a variety of approaches. As far as students, yes, we do the traditional surveys. A lot of those, we encourage them, because we have one-to-one device in our schools, is if you really want to hear, don't just send it home, do it right there in the class, where kids can take out that device right there and do that survey if you really want to hear from the masses. But we also, I have a superintendent advisory. We've got, we are planning a superintendent group that will come to the Board of Education to ask questions and bring up concerns, and just, you know, we encourage our schools to actually listen to student voice through student town halls and other avenues. And so I think it's just not having one size fits all thinking. It can't just be the voice message out on the phone call. We use that a lot as well, though. So I think it's using multiple strategies to getting that feedback.
I love that. Diversifying channels of outreach. Definitely agree with that. Students certainly receive information differently than parents in other populations. So wholeheartedly agree. Ken?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard. You know, this is getting authentic student engagement is really challenging for just a whole host of reasons. I think Trisha outlined a few of them. We don't have any great answers here. I think working with existing student groups is helpful, because there's that trust. You know, students are very suspicious of folks that are here, you know, to help, and they wear shirts and ties, and they don't look like, you know, they're friends, and they don't look like they're you know, so it's a real challenge. One other strategy that we're working on now is, because we're noticing this huge drop off in post-secondary completion. Kids who are stopping out, you know, they're going for a year and they're not coming back. And so we've contracted with a researcher from the university, a doctoral student, to go out and talk to them through structured interviews to bring that information back, so we can learn from that and bring their, it's a qualitative study, it's not a quantitative study, to really channel student voice and really understand, you know, there's the reasons we think that students aren't completing. And actually we want to talk to students that did come back for their second year, to understand, well, geez, what did you do? What helped you? What supports were effective for you, rather than for us just to assume like, oh, it must have been this program, or it must have been this financial gift. But I do think I think we got to start with the proposition that student voice is incredibly important in this work, and we need to and even though it's hard, we need to keep striving to get it to get it into this work, because we're liable to recreate broken patterns if we don't get connected to the folks that we're trying to serve.
Just a couple of examples. I did drop a link to the Hunt Institute to include in follow-up. There's Strive Together has a resource like this, but Movement Strategy also put out a spectrum that gives you concrete examples of how to move from engagement to ownership. But a concrete example, at Tulsa Public Schools, I chaired a committee for the strategic planning process. And historically, you know, you would have your business leaders, education leaders, but said, hey, can we include teachers, school leaders, parents, young people, and actually, again, had to provide transportation. We provided food, and they came to those meetings. They actually came and helped map out the next 5-year strategy. They weren't an aside, they were a part of those groups. And it's important, if we are incorporating young people and even parents into these spaces where jargon can run amok, we actually had meetings with students beforehand to go over, here's what we're talking about, here's what this means, what are your thoughts here, to make sure that they were not intimidated or, you know, left out of a conversation with practitioners. So preparing them to engage ahead of time, and also making a way for them to get there. And we had to work around their schedules. And it led to a stronger, compelling why, both with teachers and school teams, because they see why it matters to young people and why it matters to teachers and so forth. But that resource is also pretty helpful at giving you concrete strategies.
Thank you so much for sharing that resource. I appreciate all of your different angles. Everyone really appreciate that. So I wanted to move on to our next question. I think we have time for maybe one or two more. How have your organizations used the data it measures and collects to make decisions such as designing programs, expanding existing initiatives, as well as assessing existing programs to meet student needs? And how can that data be used to ensure sustainability? So kind of a two-part question there. Yeah, happy to start with whomever, but anyone, any takers?
I'll offer the first thought, but I know that this is at the center of all our work. You know, one thing that when we start to think about data, we're starting to move away from like data driven to data informed, because data driven makes it sound like and I know there's goodwill behind it, but this idea that data is informing our work, it's not. We're not just looking at the data and saying this is what we're doing, because the quantitative data that we get only tells a part of the story. It tells you where to look, but it doesn't necessarily tell you the why. And so as we look across our key indicators, that's where we start, and then we look at the key drivers behind each of those indicators. I would say how does it help frame the conversation is we do try to publish all the data we have and try to put it in context. And so that's what most of our communication, you know, we have a Tableau dashboard on our website that allows folks to manipulate data for themselves. We want to liberate data. We want data to be set free so folks can make determinations for themselves. Whenever the state issues standardized test results, we write about it. We try to put it in context. We try to make sure, again, that we're not taking a deficit mindset, but that we're looking at the data honestly. And then just the last thing I'll say around accountability is there is this move out there that we want to move away from standardized testing, and we don't want to because, you know, for a variety of reasons. And my counter argument to that is we don't want to over rely on standardized testing. It's kind of consistent with this first idea, but the idea that we don't collect data seems to me that we might be missing the opportunities to serve kids who we traditionally overlook. And so we've been really pushing for continuing to use standardized assessments, but putting them in context and not just saying, okay, whatever the test says is what is how a teacher is doing, how a student doing. Absolutely not. But in the same breath, we don't want to not collect that information and not look at it. So because we lose the opportunity to educate ourselves about what students are going through.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know several states are looking at reevaluating and revamping their assessments. So definitely interested in what comes of that. Would anyone else like to add to that? Otherwise, I'm happy to move to our next question.
Just really quickly, the Child Equity Index on our website allows us to see a variety of factors that lead to the outcomes that can contribute to the outcomes we're seeing in the schools. And we have used that to designate like a place-based strategy. If we see a particularly high-risk area, we partner with the city or school districts to design an initiative there. So again, we'll refer you to our Child Equity Index and can speak more later if you want to email us. But also operationalizing how will we know but before something starts, what are we measuring? And expanding our definition of data, we are looking at qualitative and quantitative data. We make sure to collect and set vision for what quantitative data are we going to be looking at, and what are the qualitative stories we want to make sure to elevate, and then what is the shared landscape analysis. So really disrupting those silos, using our role as a convener to understand what is working and what our funders seeing, what our school districts seeing, what is the city seeing, and how can expanding services here or adding resources there get us further. So engaging in conversation, clarity of what we're measuring, and expanding what we're measuring is my response to that question.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. So moving, I think we have time for about one more question before we close off our conversation. Cross-sector initiatives in education require ongoing partnerships, know-how, and alignment that external sectors such as healthcare and business might not be readily available to engage with education systems. So how can organizational leaders work to continuously educate and align different sectors to the needs of students? I'm happy to start with Superintendent McManus.
It honestly, and I, not to be redundant, but it's through this convening. I mean, it's through, you just have to come together because we need to educate them, but they also need to educate us. And the more we come together, the more we realize what is actually available within our community, what are the resources. And so to me, it is literally just making sure that all entities are coming together in a regular, structured way, and that when you do come together, there is an opportunity for true collaboration. I think the worst thing you can do is come together and just do updates. It really has to be like coming together, learning together, and problem solving the issues together. And that just takes intentional, regular, ongoing meetings and high quality meeting structures.
It truly is oh, sorry, Dr. Ken.
Yeah, I would pick up on that high quality meeting structure. And I think that because these meetings, if you really want to bring district leaders and business leaders and nonprofit leaders and higher ed leaders together, and civic leaders, it cannot be a pedagogical discussion. You can't talk about deep curriculum in these conversations because you're going to lose folks. So how can you structure the conversation? I think data can help. Data can provide an on-ramp. And how can you, but it has to be a roll up your sleeves kind of conversation, because if you really have the right people at the table, they're not going to want to sit and be talked to all day. If they're willing to be sit and talk to all day, you probably don't have the right people at the table, because you want people that are used to, we have 25 or 30 folks that are used to sitting at the head of the table and making decisions. And they're not going to sit there for 2 hours and just be told and watch you flip slides for your own, to hear the sound of your own glorious voice. You have to put people in work groups. And actually, one thing we find is that the reason folks come is because they get to work in cross-functional groups and not in conflict. Too often our district leaders come together and it's around enrollment boundaries or fighting over a resource or something. Hey, what if we can take an asset base? Like, here's a teacher retention strategy that we're using that's showing real results. Here's some work that's happening on FAFSA. Here's some work that's happening around literacy that we think that others could benefit from. That's a very different conversation, but it has to be engaging, has to be cross-functional, and it really does have to be authentic. If it's performative, this group will see through it in a heartbeat, and they'll recognize that this is just theater and I don't need to be here. So it does take a lot of time and thought to put these conversations together.
I'd also just quickly add leveraging when I say community assets or spaces. So we not only convene, but there's the Tulsa Regional Chamber who brings together business leaders. We send people we're members of that, but we also go to spaces where we can talk about our one voice agenda or hear the concerns of the business community that's worried about the talent shortage, so we can tie that to our work with districts to create a talent pipeline. So really encouraging our staff to stay abreast of what's going on, making sure that we are participating in conversations and also strategically convening, and then also taking advantage of that leadership table of cross-sector leaders who are coming. We're bringing together to continuously stay aware of what matters to you and how can we make sure that we're hitting a broad-based approach to strengthening our community.
Great, thank you all so much. I feel like that is a great close. I know we only have a minute or so left, but I do want to close off the conversation and thank Ken, Superintendent McManus, and Ashley for joining us for today's engaging discussion. Before closing today's discussion, I do want to turn everyone real quick to our upcoming K-12 webinars. Our next conversation will be on Thursday, October 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern, where former West Virginia Governor and Congressman Bob Wise, Belinda Lake of Lake Research Partners, and State Education Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker of Connecticut will update you all on what we're hearing from parents and the public with updated results from our nationwide voter survey and how policymakers and education leaders can put and translate public voices into policy action. And so it'll be a great conversation. Please register for that if you're interested. We'll post that in the chat so you can register now or at a later time. We also encourage you to join us for our other upcoming K-12 webinars listed on the next slide. You can register for these discussions by going to our website, which we'll also post in the slide, or sorry, in the chat. So thank you all again for joining us today. Thank you again to our panelists, and we hope to see you all again very soon.